Hello everybody, welcome to the latest edition of the Royal Blue podcast. My name is Joe Thomas, I'm the Echo's Everton FC correspondent, and alongside me we've got regular contributor Gav Buckland. Bit of a smaller cast today, a combination of holidays and other commitments and things like that, but hopefully we'll be able to keep you entertained. Gav, how's your week been so far?
It's been all right, Joe. Yeah, I've been doing a few stats for the new season.
Anything that you can share? Is there one stat that you can share with us right now, or is it?
I'm not that far advanced actually. I'm just getting my XGs in order at the moment. But yeah, so I've just been looking at a bit of stuff for next year. See what we can glean.
Yeah,
I'll have something for you next week.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine it being a particularly enjoyable task looking at XG from last season. It wasn't. I mean, obviously, I know they created more chances and goals they scored, but there wasn't much going on in the opposition. Yeah. Most of it.
Yeah, I was just looking at a few bits. Not the team and player. I don't really look at player stats that much. We're going to be a bit more emphasis on it this year because they're obviously more and more important, aren't they? Really. So I'll be looking at the XGs and all that type of stuff and carries and all these words that didn't exist years ago or even 10, 15 years ago.
It's crazy how much the game's changed in terms of that type of analysis, hasn't it? It's quite interesting from kind of the perspective of dealing with Everton, just how much importance they place on it. Frank Lampard and the team around him were very, very big on the data. And it's quite intriguing when you listen to Sean Dyche. For Sean Dyche, the data is only really a part of the wider picture. One of the words that we'll have press conference ahead of Fulham next Thursday, and we will get the bingo cards out again for all the words that Dyche repeats all the time. But one of them that he really does, and you kind of understand what he means, is the feel. What he gets from the feel. That's where he goes to games to scout players or scout opposition in person when he can. That's where he likes to be on the training ground and involved in everything. It really is kind of, as I say, fascinating how he will only let the data take him to a certain point. And I think that you probably see him as quite old-fashioned in that way. But I do think that for all that we do talk about data analysis, and we know how much of an impact that's had on other sports, baseball being the obvious one, and how that's then correlated into football and Liverpool's success, where they've been taking on that kind of the money ball and the stats, and obviously there's a significant place for it. And Everton's data unit has been expanding under Kevin Felwell. But it really is kind of intriguing that Dyche will only let it take him so far. But where are you on that, Gav? as you're someone that's constantly looking at the Everton stats, and obviously you've been going to the game for decades and decades.
Yeah.
As the evolution of your understanding of the game has gone on, do you still?
I think there's a place for him. I'm more the Dyche sort of feeling for it. I mean, you can't tell what goes on in players' heads, can you, for a start? And it's interesting. I was reading an article during the summer about how you actually scout, a game. You turn up at a game, and when you scout a game, it's not like watching it. Like we watch a game, don't we? New report on it. When you scout a game, you tend to look 30 yards ahead of the ball. Like to see how and lots of, that's one of the things you'll scout is don't look at the ball, look at 30 yards ahead of the ball. So if you're looking at a forward, say, you're looking at his runs or his, like pace and stuff like that. If you're looking at a defender, with what positions to take up, and that's completely that's how you're judging a player. But we haven't got the data, so you've got two things that are completely different, aren't you? You've got event data. And you've got sort of what's going on the pitch that you can't yet measure. Yeah, as a scout, you think that's a really important aspect of watching a player, and you can't measure that. And the two things are sort of, they don't match up, do they, at the moment? And I suppose that's what Dyche is saying, I think, isn't he? Is you've got to match them to, two sets of observations and put them together and see what you get. And I think that's right. I don't think you can just do it just on what they call event data in the trade. There's a lot more to that, and there's without getting really boring, it can be like, say, Duncan Ferguson has the best headed, best number of headers per game in the Premier League, but actually most centre-halves, when they see Duncan jumping for the ball, they're probably not going to challenge. They're more interested in what happens to the ball after that. And, it's all that type of stuff that I think is interesting. It's what happens after you've headed it. Where did you head it? Did you head it to the opponents? Did it just go into empty space? That's what you want to know. And I think that's the type of stuff that Dice is getting at. And but the really, really fascinating thing about it is, and I remember reading this about 10, 15 years ago. Gilles Gramondi, who used to play for Arsenal, I think when he won the double in '98, he became a coach in France. And he was saying 10 years ago, he noticed how players' behaviour was even changing then. About, the stats being really important to him. So he noticed that where players previously went into a tackle that was 40-60 against them, they won't go into that now. Because
that's fascinating, Gav. It's interesting the way.
Yeah.
I remember speaking to Frank Lampard before the World Cup, and he had he didn't go out to the World Cup. He didn't have a punditry role. He wasn't going out there for scouting purposes, and I think obviously part of that was due to, despite the obvious need for reinforcements in January, there was also a limit to what Everton were probably in a situation where anybody who particularly impressed at the World Cup was going to be outside of their price range. But one of the comments that he made was kind of along the lines of, you can do so much without actually going to a game. And obviously you can, because there is all this stuff around players, and you have companies that put together packages, video analysis, stats analysis. But again, like you say there, what none of that can tell you, what you can't tell from looking at the TV or anywhere else is things like that movement that's going on off screen, what's outside of the picture around what's happening with the ball, and that's quite interesting. Obviously, we've gone off on that's some tangent that we've gone off to start with there. But
it's relevant to us, though, isn't it? It's relevant to Everton and how we recruit, and how maybe Thelwell's recruitment tactics, for want of a better phrase, are maybe different.
Kind of where I'm going to start the meat of the podcast as well, because we spoke earlier on this week. A lot of the conversation was around the need for a striker. Everton had just missed out on El Bilal Toure. Within an hour or two of us having left Lovelock's coffee shop to move on with our day, we had the breaking news about Youssef Chermiti and Everton. Everton's involvement there, the bid for him. Obviously, talks are continuing as we're speaking now on Friday morning, but things look relatively advanced, and it looks like it's almost Everton's to lose as it is. Now, I've got no shame whatsoever in saying that's something that came absolutely out of the blue to me. He wasn't a player that was on my radar in general, let alone in terms of might be someone that Everton were looking at. And I think, in fairness to the relatively large community of people that like to say that they have knowledge on this, and obviously some of them do, and there's an even bigger number that don't. I think most have put their hands up and said this has come out of the blue, which is probably a good sign from Everton in terms of a business point of view, in that the fact there's no one leaking, that's a good thing. Bad for journalists and in the knows and those in between and those who want to be either of those, but probably good for the club. Now, Gav, one of the things that's quite interesting, I haven't had an in-depth look at his stats or anything like that, but he seems to be of a similar profile to Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and a lot of what we've spoken about is how Dominic Calvert-Lewin's attributes are so fundamental to the way in which Everton play and set up. When you heard about Youssef Chermiti and started to look at him, what were your thoughts on him as a potential Everton signing, and what that meant about what Kevin Thelwell and Sean Dyche and Dan Purdy and that are looking to do? Were you looking at that and thinking, this is a 19-year-old kid who's had half a season in the top flight of Portugal, scored 3 goals in a side that obviously Sporting are one of the most competitive in that league, and I think the drop-off is quite substantial once you get outside the top 5, 6. Were you looking at that and thinking, are Everton in a situation now where they're really having to kind of scrape the bottom of the barrel and go for players that are really at the beginning of their careers and hoping that they've got a high ceiling? Or were you actually reassured and looking, you know what, Everton have probably got a profile here. They've got that Dominic Calvert-Lewin profile, and what they're doing is they are hunting far and wide for the type of players that might be able to do that type of job. And the fact that they've come up with someone that is relatively an obscure name to most of us at the moment, does that actually kind of fill you with a bit of confidence that there's a plan there that they're sticking to, and that's a plan that might have the most effective chance of working for Everton.
Yeah. At first, I'd never heard of him, to be honest with you, probably like a lot of people. The first thought is we'll be buying another striker, hopefully, between now and the transfer window. That I don't think he seems, because of his age and his development, I think it's like 900 professional minutes, is it, something like that, which is a really small career. My thought is that he's not DCL's replacement. He's like the replacement's replacement. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is I think these type of signings tend to be quite low risk. If you're buying somebody that young who's got potential, even if it doesn't work at Everton, there's still going to be a market for them. I'm thinking there, like Moise Kean would be one of them examples where, a terrible time at Everton, because of his age and his profile, as you say, and, what he'd done previously to get him bought by Everton, he's still, there's still a big market for him, and you can get a good price, which is what's happened. And I see the same with this lad. And I think I'm pleased that, as you say, it shows a little bit of imagination, spreading our boundaries a bit, Joe, in terms of where we're recruiting from. And I'd like to think it's not the end of our forward purchasing during the summer.
I don't think it doesn't look like an obvious end to it. We know that. We reported yesterday that Everton are kind of sounding out like Che Adams. That's something that they've kind of got on their radar as a potential. I think one of the things that I like the idea of in relation to Chermiti is there's part of me, and obviously this only goes so far, that thinks it's less about the ability to a certain extent of what the player can do. If the Dominic Calvert-Lewin isn't fit on the pitch and on the pitch and isn't playing, or he needs to come off for the last half an hour, bearing in mind how kind of restricted Everton's ways of playing are, part of it comes down to where that player is in their development is less important than what they bring to Everton's shape. If they allow to Everton to play in that way, and it's not so much that Chermiti comes in and has to score 15 goals, but through replicating something that Dominic Calvert-Lewin does, or through replicating, or for allowing Everton to play the other 10 players around them to play in their most effective way to get positive results, what he might do is he might bring the extra 5 or 6 goals out of Alex Iwobi or Dwight McNeil or Arno Danjuma, and that also kind of is really important, bearing in mind the restrictions that Everton are working in the sense that you don't think that Sean Dyche is going to rip everything up and all of a sudden just change everything at the last minute. So I think that's the problem that they did with Neal Maupay last season. It felt like they got to a situation where they go, we just need a striker with some sort of goal-scoring pedigree somewhere. And then they got him, and he didn't bring anything that supported the style of which Everton were looking to play.
Yeah. I mean, it's what we say there is the player's not important. It's the system that's important, isn't it? And the player fits him at that. And as fans, we can't criticise the club for buying Maupay, who was not like what you would normally expect us to have playing up front, considering the players we've got, and then criticise us for buying this lad. Can you really? Because we're buying this lad to address sort of the issues that maybe should have been addressed 12 months ago. And I get that. And you can see, even though he might be third down the pecking order, you can see him getting quite a bit of game time next year for a number of reasons. I mean, they're talking about. I mean, we spoke about this the other week, Joe, didn't we? About the with 5 subs is a game with them. It's effectively 2 games now, isn't it? Football, and they're talking. They're saying this week about having further extra injury time being played for stoppages and time wasting. And somebody like this lad coming off the bench after 90 minutes, when there could be like another 15 minutes left to play. That could be a real asset for you, couldn't it? Really, and I think players like this on who is second, third, maybe third in the pecking order, in that sort of environment where we could have 110-minute games football next season. They could be getting a lot more game time than what you think. They could be coming on as a sub in the 90th minute and still we have 15 minutes left to play.
Well, that's it. And also, if you want to kind of say Dominic Calvert-Lewin is out and about, obviously you also want to protect him. And
Yeah,
that means taking him off after 65, 70 minutes. Say, for instance, against Arsenal, Sean Dyche's first game, Dominic Calvert-Lewin was absolutely superb. And although he didn't get on the score sheet, he was instrumental in Everton getting into a situation where they could go on to win that match. But what it kind of felt like, obviously with Dominic Calvert-Lewin a lot of time last season, was he was either on the pitch for the whole game or he wasn't on it. But there's that danger as they're trying to kind of work around his body and make the most of him. There's that danger that with Everton's squad as it currently is, what happens is that after 65, 70 minutes, if they have to bring Dominic Calvert-Lewin off, then all of a sudden they're effectively sacrificing the last 20 minutes. If that becomes 30 because of additional extra time, because they can't carry on playing in that same style and they don't have an effective plan B, you effectively have to do everything that you have to do a huge amount of the work if you want to get a win in that first 70 minutes as opposed to the last 20, 25. And if you've got somebody that obviously won't be as good as Dominic Calvert-Lewin or as experienced as Dominic Calvert-Lewin at this stage in their career, but if you've got someone that continues to allow the players like Danjuma and that around him to play in a way that suits their strengths, and that is an easier transition that gives Everton a better chance of being competitive for longer within games.
Yeah, absolutely. And, might have another striker that gives us that option. I mean, it all falls down to discussed about DCL's fitness, this, Joe, doesn't it, really? Because all of these conversations about who we're going to buy and, their profile, as it were, is, the key to this is DCL, isn't it, really? Because I think he got some game time this week. It's looking, you would think, we'll go to about Sporting Lisbon. His sort of trajectory, fitness-wise, doesn't seem to indicate to me that he's going to be there on the opening day. Perhaps, though, there'd been rabbits out of the hat with DCL before, of course. And so it's like, do we need another striker between? What's his name? Is it Chitimi? What's his name? Chitimi, is it? What's this lad's name?
Chermiti is how I'm saying it. That's the phonetics as I'm looking at it, but it might be said differently.
Yeah. Chermiti and DCL. Somebody between them is probably, a priority. And, if you get somebody in before the Fulham game, that they might have an opportunity of playing, to be honest with you, if they're fit. What I've heard about Danjuma, I've not seen that much of pre-season. I don't think Danjuma strikes me as somebody who's going to play down the middle. And you've got Mopai. I've got a few options. So
Danjuma played down as the one in the 4-5-1 Stoke the other day, and it was patently obvious that isn't his position. And in fairness, Sean Dyche was pretty clear about that after the game in terms of saying he wasn't necessarily putting him in that position because that's where he wants to play him. It's simply a case of he was still selecting a lineup with fitness in mind, and he wanted that was the place to get Danjuma onto the pitch to try and give him 45 plus minutes. So.
Yeah, so our forward, we have got options up front, but they're not ideal. And this sort of points to that we will. I think from the pitch this week hopefully something made. If it happens, then there'll be another striker income, and what that means for Mopai and possibly Gray is a different story, isn't it? Really,
we're talking a lot about Fulham, and obviously that's where Gray's heavily linked to. Yeah. Gray's been away on international duty with Jamaica, which is why he hasn't been around the squad for much of pre-season. But it is also notable that he wasn't involved in the behind closed doors game against Monza, which you'd think would be the obvious time to bring him in. Obviously, Garner and Branthwaite similarly had extensive international campaigns that went into their season, and they've both featured at Stoke and then in the Branthwaite featured against Monza. Demarai Gray didn't. Obviously, there's speculation about whether he is training or not training. He is with the group of players, but I think it's clear, and I think we probably knew this at the end of last season, that Everton are probably willing to listen to offers if they come in. I think it's probably a case of where does he go to now rather than does he go anywhere, because I'm not sure that he is in Sean Dyche's plans, or that he really was at the back end of last season beyond having to use him when he needed to due to injuries and things like that. So it's quite an interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, I said that I did last time we spoke about this. I said about Gray is like that. I'd probably accept a fee far lower than perhaps what's being quoted for the simple reason that, I mean, we're talking about forward additions now, aren't we? Dice doesn't fancy him. His options are going to be limited, especially with Danjuma coming in, and therefore he's going to be a bench warmer next year who's out of contract. So what you don't want is us to turn down, say, something like £7 or £8 million because we think it's too low, and then see him leave on a fee this time next year, having not hardly played.
Yeah, well, Besiktas were in last weekend in around the £6 million mark. I think the one thing that whilst I agree with what you're saying, I think Demarai Gray is also one of the players they've got who they can kind of, because he has a track record of doing, at the very least, moments of magic within the Premier League. He's probably one of the few players. There are probably a handful of players in that squad where they would bite their hand off for anybody to take them for a fee. With Demarai Gray, he's probably one of the few that they can come in and think, well, maybe we could push this a little bit because there is a little bit more to sell.
Yeah.
So, and I think that my understanding of Everton's transfer approach this summer is they essentially want to end up even. So what they spend, they get back. That's what they want to try and get to a point of. And obviously, they've got money in for Ish Samuel-Smith. They got money in for Ellis Sims. They're going to get money in for Demarai Gray. They'll get money in. They've got a little bit of money in for things like Stan Mills going out on loan to Oxford. There was a fee there, and they're probably we spoke a lot about them in the past, but as they increase their forward options, so too does the likelihood of Tom Cannon going out on loan increase, and they will, if that happens, they will get a loan fee there. It's all about trying to stack up these fees to kind of, because they haven't, they paid a loan fee for Danjuma of £3 or £4 million, and then after €3 or €4 million, I think, sorry. And obviously Ashley Young was a free, so they haven't spent money properly yet. There probably is a little bit left from the stuff that they've got in so far, but I think Demarai Gray will be the transfer that tries to take them almost to maybe, a Chermiti and a half, takes them whatever their down payment is on Chermiti, and then hopefully kind of does a little bit of legwork with helping to fund another signing. And obviously, if they could find a way to get some money for Andre Gomez or Mason Holgate, I think they would, but it may well be that they end up on loan.
Yeah, on that basis, then there's another Iwobi-sized elephant in the room, isn't there? Over contracts and transfers, isn't it? Because I think his contract's up next summer, isn't it? Yeah. So therefore, we're in haven't seen. We've mentioned a couple of players like Gomez there, haven't you? Haven't seen them for the last 4 or 5 years. Players that we spent big money for us leaving when their contracts ended for nothing. What's the current feelings you think about Iwobi in terms of his short-term future with us and leaving or staying or?
I think most, if not everyone in the Everton squad has a price. But obviously, some are far more important than others. And I think what Iwobi does is his versatility fills in a lot of gaps for Everton at the moment. And we've spoken about the loss of Tom Davis now. Obviously, Tom Davis was a bit part player at best. He was a fringe player. He was unfortunate. There were times when he appeared to be on the cusp of breaking into the side or having a greater involvement, and he got injured. He was unfortunate in that case. But it was clear that he was no more important to Deitch than coming on last 10 minutes, one of the rare changes that he might make for a fresh pair of legs. But the fact that they offered him a new contract, despite the lack of involvement that he had, suggested that they felt there was a need for another central midfielder in that squad. What Iwobi does is, in a way that Demarai Gray doesn't, Alex Iwobi kind of offers that option. He played left of centre midfield in the three under Lampard and was one of the few players that came out, I think, with genuine credit from that Frank Lampard first half of the season. He was a creative machine, essentially. Becoming the World Cup, he was rivaling the likes of De Bruyne and that for assists, despite the fact that more often than not, he didn't have a striker to even be supplying them for. I like Iwobi in that role. I'd probably start him there in my first choice Everton lineup, but I think Deitch probably sees him on the right of midfield as I imagine that the way that Deitch is going, I kind of maybe 4-5-1 or a 4-4-1-1, ideally with Danjuma playing off Calvert-Lewin through the middle and McNeil and Iwobi almost as kind of wide midfielders rather than wingers, so they can do a little bit of the defensive work as well. So I think Iwobi is more important to Deitch than Damari Gray is. I think if somebody was to come in and offer serious money for him or a fee that would tempt Everton, then they have to have a conversation. But I do think striker is the most obvious position where they need to reinforce. And then there are a couple of other secondary areas that probably would get strengthened in a window where they had better circumstances at play. I think one of those is I think they really do need a right winger or a right midfielder, right winger. And bearing in mind they're already, which is why they're looking at Kamaldeen Sulemana from Southampton, someone that they were in for in January, because he might address that need. But obviously, if they can't solve that, then Iwobi is pretty much their only option there anyway. So he kind of has that dual responsibility. If you can, if you want to play with a right winger, he probably plays on the right wing. If you want to play with a right midfielder and you want his work rate to be key, like Dwight McNeil on the left, then he does that role. And if you need someone if there's a bit of a crisis in the centre midfield with injuries, bearing in mind that Deitch likes to play three of them, then he can also fill in that, as we saw him do against Wigan, where he did start left centre midfield. So maybe that was an attempt to just have a look at him in that role.
Yeah, I think I get the Iwobi thing. I think the concern for me is he plays this season and then goes. I mean, he's on big money. Iwobi, it's supported, and obviously for him to maintain that level of income.
Yeah, well, he's not on as bigger money as some of the bigger contracts at Everton, and obviously that's why there was attempts to time. I think that was one of the things about he's been in contract negotiations effectively since last September, and obviously nothing's come of it. So there's clearly stuff going on behind the scenes there anyway in terms of long-term future. And
he might just want to. If he went on, he's in a good position that if he stays at Everton, and I mentioned this before on the pod, that he's actually in quite a strong position negotiation-wise. That just briefly is that if he stays, well, he's got the fact that he can go for the free next year, and if he went, we'd have to spend cash on the replacement, wouldn't we? And the last thing we've got is cash. We'd rather possibly pay Iwobi on the tip wage-wise over 4 or 5 years than let him go for nothing next year and then have to pay cash for another player. So that strengthens his negotiation for me, and I can possibly see that he might stay if you offer him the right deal of Iwobi, which I know there's people. I don't mind it. That could be a decentish where we stand at the moment. That could be a decentish result for us, because it'll stop if we don't get a really good offer for him. That's probably our best option, to be fair. And probably
I
the
like
best
him a
option.
lot. I think he's one of the best Everton's best players of last season. I rate him. I do, but rate him so long as he's put in a side where he has the opportunity to kind of make the most use of his attributes, and that might not be in a Sean Dyche side if he wants to play him as a right midfielder. So that kind of obviously then opens up the potential for a departure. I mean, the midfield is worth looking at from a kind of longer term perspective, because obviously next summer you also have Abdoulaye Doucouré and Idrissa Gueye who will be out of contract as well. So that's kind of the other interesting thing, which is kind of on the horizon a little bit as well, as the Africa Cup of Nations in January, February, where Abdoulaye Doucouré, Idrissa Gueye and Alex Iwobi all play for nations that have qualified and therefore could end up going into those squads, and Everton could potentially lose out on them for a couple of games, which would be another interesting development.
Let's just get to January.
Let's get to the end of the transfer window first.
Yeah, let's get to the first game of the season. Yeah, interesting.
So I mean, one player that obviously we referenced a little bit, the behind closed doors game against Monza, 0-0 at half time. It was Neil Maupay came on, had a good game, scored the goal that put Everton 2-1. But Lewis Dobbin got the first and then set up Neil Maupay's goal. He's having a good pre-season, Lewis Dobbin. Gav, I'm not sure if you've had much of an opportunity to see him, but did you see the goal he scored against Montenegro?
Yeah, I've seen him.
Impressive.
Yeah, I mean, if you set aside the fact that friendlies and behind closed doors friendlies, it's different, aren't they, to first team games. We mentioned a couple of weeks ago, didn't we, that there might be somebody in pre-season who might just come out of left field a little bit that you weren't expecting and do something that you weren't expecting them to do, and perhaps maybe Dobbin is heading in that direction. It'll be interesting to see the selection for the Lisbon game, and I mean, he was at Derby. I mean, he didn't score a lot of goals, did he, at Derby? Or 4 or 5 and 40, which isn't. And when you, as I say before, when you're that age and you're not knocking on the door of the Premier League, then you only struggle, I think, to become it might be near impossible for you to be a Premier League regular. And he's sort of in that sort of grey area, isn't he? And you don't know, do you? You don't know. There may be a short-term opportunity for him while our recruitment is in the state of flux, as I say, up front, and we've got a few injuries. There might just be an opportunity there for him. And you just don't know, do you? Even if he comes in as a couple of good games, it'll be a help. So yeah, I remember he come on. He was quite feisty the time I saw him. As he come on at Chelsea the season before last, I think, when we drew 1-1, and I think he might have got himself booked, I think. And he looked quite. He looked. I'd say he looked a little bit feisty and a little bit about him. So yeah, he's not done himself any harm, has he? Either way. And it'd be interesting to see what happens with Dobbin over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, if I had to put money on who was going to emerge as the most positive of the young players from this, I probably wouldn't have put it on Dobbin. Obviously, I would have started with Tom Cannon. He's been injured. And I probably would have looked at Mills and Warrington, who've both already been allowed to depart on loan. So it's been fascinating to watch him, and he has given a good account of himself, and Dyche has spoken positively. One thing I've liked is just how direct he is. Everton didn't have many players last season. Certainly, they got hold of the ball, they'd run at players, and they go for the byline, or they go for cut inside and try and get into the box. That's something that Dobbin seems really keen to do, which is quite refreshing to see, I think, from somebody that's in royal blue. One more pre-season friendly to go, or certainly one in front of public, and that's Sporting Lisbon tomorrow. Gav, what is there anything that you haven't seen? There's one very obvious one. Is there anything that you haven't seen yet that you would like to see in that game? What do you think? What do you think we still need to learn about this side before we go into Fulham?
What is the side?
Yeah,
I think that is. I mean, I think that I'd be interested to see what the centre halves are.
Yeah,
I think that would be something to look at. My experience, most managers will build their final friendly or thereabouts will always try and get their best team, what they think starting the game, the first game of the season on the pitch. And so I think we can, what I want to learn tomorrow is the team, because I suspect that won't be 100 million miles away from what we have against Fulham. I think the centre halves will be interesting. Possibly a striker who plays up front, and then take it from there. And because it's only 7 days then, isn't it? So we haven't got a game after this. Is our last game, is it, Joe? We haven't got anything.
It's the last game that I'm aware of. It's certainly the last public game. They might end up with another behind closed doors friendly next week. Managers don't tend to like to do that so close to the season. Speaking to Alex Neil at Stoke at the weekend, and obviously Everton was his last game before his Stoke side play Rotherham in the Championship kick-off this weekend, and he was saying that had nothing behind closed doors arranged because it's just a little bit too much in that last week of the season when you're trying to pre-season when you're trying to finesse everything. It's not ideal to the preparation. So, so it'll be interesting to see whether or not Dyche goes down that route. But yeah, there are a couple of things. I think we'll learn a lot about the centre-back partnership, and I still think that Keane and Tarkowski feels like the most obvious one to start with, bearing in mind, well, they started every public pre-season game so far, albeit that Branthwaite's been away for some of them. You'd think it's probably going to be Young and Patterson at full-back. Mykolenko played 45 minutes against Monza. I mean, that's another narrative, isn't it? Who's going to be the first choice left back? But it may well be that it's a while, but it's a while until Mykolenko's got up to full fitness, so we can really learn what the answer to that question is. Obviously, there's a chance that James Garner might end up being at right back, but I think Dyche has played Garner in the middle when he has played him so far this summer. He's played Patterson at right back every time, but yeah, I think it'll be good to see the best thing to see. The obvious thing to say is Dominic Calvert-Lewin, isn't it? It'd be nice to see him in the matchday squad and have some sort of involvement that would maybe give you a bit of hope that he might be available for Fulham. But I think that Dominic Calvert-Lewin's, well, I'm not saying that he may well be able to be involved in Fulham. I think his timeline is possibly running at a slightly different rate to what pre-season and the football calendar is, I think. So, I don't think they're going to rush him back for the first game or take any chances to get him back on the pitch, will they? So one of the things I'm quite interested in is Victor Gokera's. I mean, we've been over this time and time again, but someone who was so heavily linked with Everton for so long, that's that'd be an interesting one. And obviously, it's also Youssef Chermiti's side, isn't it? It's Sporting, so he was coming to Merseyside this week, whether it be to play for either side or a medical or whatever. It's quite interesting when you look at it because Everton have quite strong links with Sporting. Obviously, they've got this friendly here. They've gone in for this deal with Chermiti. You look at Ruben Vinagre came on loan from Sporting last season, and the year before, João Virginia went the other way. So there is a bit of a relationship there. I'm not quite sure where it started from.
Don't ask, is Nuno Valente still doing a bit of work for us? I know he was doing work for us in Portugal.
Actually, the club put some quotes out from Nuno Valente in relation to the weekend's game, didn't they? So that's the obvious one, isn't it? I've missed that. Good spot, Gav.
Yeah. I've not forgiven him for they knocked us out of Europe in 2010. Sporting Lisbon in the Europa League, or might have been called the UEFA Cup. Still, I've not forgiven them since that. No, but they're like the cooler team, aren't they? In Lisbon, aren't they? Sporting Lisbon. That's where Ronaldo started, didn't he? Great kit as well.
It's a great kit, isn't it? Right.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to wrap it up there. Obviously, it's just the two of us, and I'm sure that you're starting to find us a little bit tedious at this point. So.
Oh, no, tell you what, Joe, I did want to say something actually. You mentioned before we start about the commercial update.
Oh, yes, of course.
During the week, which I thought that was quite interesting. Bear in mind that, we get criticised, everyone get criticised for not communicating and stuff. I thought it was it was good positive communication.
Yeah,
wasn't it?
I thought so. I had mixed feelings in the sense that, and for those who have read it'd be interesting what people think if they read the commercial update and then if they read my write-up around it, where I essentially add in all the context that I think is relevant that's missing from the club update, as in the relegation battles of the last 2 years, the transfer window struggles, and the profit and sustainability allegation, and a few other bits and pieces. From my perspective, obviously they announced the kick shirt sleeve agreement earlier on in the week. Everton, I found it very important to couch Everton's claims that they're effectively getting the best deals outside commercial agreements outside the best six in their own terms, because it's very difficult to ever actually get the figures for the commercial arrangements. Like Everton don't tell you, and that's not unique to Everton by any stretch of the imagination.
No, absolutely.
They're very, very, and because different clubs package up their figures in their accounts slightly different, it's not as simple as going and saying, well, Everton's commercial revenue was, I think, 50.3 million or something along those lines last summer. Let's last accounts, let's compare that to every other. That's also not quite a straight comparison.
Yeah.
So it's impossible. It's nigh on impossible to verify the claims. But I did think the fact that somebody was willing to, and in this case, obviously Richard Kenyon, someone that was willing to, first of all, have that communication in the first place and put those claims on record in their own name. That to me is a step forward, and I think that is something that should be recognised as important.
I've done like research over this over the several, about like commercial stuff. When you see our deals now, they are reported. We do tend to be, like you got two the big ones, your kids deal and your share deal and stuff. When they're reported independently, we do tend to be around, the 7th or 8th. Highest. And there's obvious reason for that is the size of the club, the fact that, dare I say, we have to be in Premier League regulars, so we've tested that hypothesis out for 2 seasons. That we are a big club, so naturally you would expect us to be there, wouldn't you really? I mean, it was interesting that when Kazoo sponsored both Everton and Villa, they paid Everton £4 million more than Villa. Even though Everton and Villa are like similar sized clubs and stuff. And I thought that was quite illuminating. And so I would, though some of these claims, like you say, what is a kit deal? What's closer? Is that what you get paid? Because that could be dependent on speed, position in the league, whether you end up in Europe and stuff. You always got to see that with a pinch of salt. Is when you do look at what people say independently and they give the list of the best kit deals and the best sponsorship deals and all that type of stuff, we do tend to be around the 7th or 8th highest, and that will change obviously with Newcastle, what's going on there. So there is,
latency does matter, doesn't it? And it'll be, Everton's performance over the last few years will trickle into the next few unless they can do something about it in the coming this season and next, won't it? And that's probably the danger. They're probably still making those deals based on where they were 3 years ago or even 18 months ago before they end up in the relegation battle under Frank Lampard. And I think the double danger is one, Everton's recent performances and the fact that it's hard to see them set in the Premier League alight next season. Hopefully they get to a point where they can be a mid-table safe team, but anything more I think would be a huge surprise. Whilst that's going on, obviously Aston Villa and Newcastle are kind of on they're very, very upwardly mobile at the moment, and obviously both in Europe next season. And they may well be able to kind of capitalise on that in a way that Everton struggles to compete with when they're next arranging the deals. Hopefully that's not the case, but we'll have to wait and see.
No, and get the comments. I think you mentioned, I think the sort of what you were saying, your piece indirectly, and what other people have said is, we were saying we're the best of the people outside of Europe, not playing. Well, we're actually criticising ourselves by that. Obviously, we're underperformed because we should be challenging for Europe or getting into Europe. But I just thought from a communication point, and I get that it can be difficult quantifying these things, but I thought it was a good positive piece.
Yeah, there's a big difference between people trying to brief that they're the 7th best and somebody willing to go and put that in their own words with their face and their name behind it, which is what's happened this time round. And I think that does deserve to be recognised as a step forward.
Yeah, good to see.
Absolutely. Right, thanks very much for listening to us, everyone. We'll be back early next week. It may be Tuesday rather than Monday. We're just trying to work out some logistics at the minute, but it will obviously be post-sporting and hopefully post the signing of Youssef Chermiti and a few other bits and pieces and developments in the transfer window, so that we've got plenty to talk about. We certainly will anyway, because with the upcoming season just a few days away by that point, so we'll probably move on to some of our longer pods as we all discuss where we think Everton are going to go and get people to commit to some predictions, I think, as well. So, and we can hold them to it over the course of the season. But thanks so much for listening to us again. This has been the Royal Blue Podcast. We really appreciate your time and your interest. So thank you very much. Have a lovely weekend.